Montana's first statewide all-mail-in ballot election is now in the books with a record number of votes cast for a primary. But as MTN chief political reporter Mike Dennison tells us, Tuesday's election had very few surprises as far as outcomes.
The top contests going into Tuesday's election were the primaries for governor. And as expected, Congressman Greg Gianforte won an easy victory over Attorney General Tim Fox and State Senator Al Olszewski with 53% of the vote. On the Democratic side, Lieutenant Governor Mike Cooney, a political veteran, dispatched newcomer Whitney Williams 56 to 44%. Now, Gianforte, who spent at least $1.5 million of his own money on the primary, will see if he can bring the governor's chair back to the Republican fold for the first time in 16 years. In the race for the U.S. House seat that Gianforte is leaving, the favorites won their respective primaries, Democrat Kathleen Williams and Republican Matt Rosendale. It was a walk for Williams over State Representative Tom Winter by 80 percentage points, while Rosendale had a tougher time, winning a six-way race with 48%. To second-place finisher Corey Stapleton's 34%. Williams and Rosendale had the big campaign war chest among the crowded fields and will face off this fall in what's expected to be a close contest. Tuesday's primary also made it official for our closely watched U.S. Senate race. Democratic Governor Steve Bullock will challenge Republican Steve Daines as they each won their respective primaries with ease. And let's not forget the U.S. Senate Green Party primary, where Wendy Frederickson defeated Dennis Danicki by a couple of hundred votes out of almost 700 cast. Two races that had at least some uncertainty yesterday were the primaries for Attorney General. But in the GOP contest, it was a clear victory for former House Speaker Austin Knudsen of Culbertson, who won 60 to 40% over Deputy Attorney General John Bennion. Knudsen will compete this fall against Rafe Graybill, who defeated State Representative Kim Dudick in the Democratic primary 58 to 42%. One other thing worth mentioning. In almost every statewide primary, the number of Republican voters far outnumbered the number of voters in the Democratic primaries. Yet a lot more people will be voting in the general election in November, so it's hard to draw conclusions about turnout from the primary. In Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
And you can see more analysis of Tuesday's primary results at 11 o'clock this morning on a Facebook Live broadcast with Mike Dennison, Jay Cohn, and our Republican and Democratic commentators. So Mike went over a review of everything. We're going to take a look at some of the specifics of those election night results now. Of course, among the most watched races were the state primary contests for governor. So here are the specific results of that on the Republican side. Three men looking to replace Governor Steve Bullock. Congressman Greg Gianforte came out on top last night with 53% of the vote, running against Attorney General Tim Fox and State Senator Al Olszewski. There were two familiar names in Montana politics seeking the Democratic nomination for governor. Preliminary numbers from last night showing Lieutenant Governor Mike Cooney will advance to the November election. He garnered about 55% of the vote over opponent Whitney Williams. Cooney told MTN News on Tuesday night he's been through this before and wasn't going to rush to conclusions before all the votes were counted, but was proud of the campaign his team ran. MTN's John Riley was with the Lieutenant Governor on election night.
Current Lieutenant Governor of Montana, Mike Cooney, has claimed the Democrat nomination for governor. His opponent, Missoula businesswoman Whitney Williams, conceded the race Tuesday evening.
I always thought that we had captured really the true Montana values that we heard from Montanans and we talked about during our campaign. We're going to continue to do that into the general election. I'm looking forward to it.
Cooney grew up in Butte before moving to Helena. In addition to being Lieutenant Governor, Cooney has served as Montana's Secretary of State, President of the State Senate, and in the Montana House of Representatives. Cooney's running mate is House Minority Leader Casey Schreiner.
We're going to continue to talk about the importance of health care, having accessible health care in Montana, affordable health care, affordable prescription drugs. We're going to be talking about what the need to continue to invest in our public education. We're going to continue to talk about keeping dark money out of elections.
The Cooney campaign says their next step is to use this momentum to connect with Montana voters and continue to hear from the people what they are most concerned about. It's still a long way until November 3rd, and will be a hard-fought race if Democrats hope to continue their 16-year run holding the governor's office. Reporting from Helena, John Riley, MTN News.
Meanwhile, the Democratic battle for Montana's lone U.S. House seat featured several Montana political veterans. Montana legislator Kathleen Williams we're taking a look at those results now. 90% of the vote that she garnered last night, strong lead against State Representative Tom Winter of Missoula. Williams was somewhat of a dark horse about 2 years ago, but this time came in as the favorite, and we did catch up with her on her win Tuesday night.
Voting for someone who puts all of Montana over partisan politics, who puts people over party and policy over politics, and that is really going to go to Congress and bring back results for all of Montana, not just special interests.
The race for Capitol Hill is a little less crowded this morning on the Republican side. Results show Tuesday's leader as State Auditor Matt Rosendale, garnering 48% of the vote. He was running against Secretary of State Corey Stapleton, who got 33%. We also spoke with Rosendale last night.
You know, I'm very, very thankful for everyone who supported me in the campaign. And my challenge right now, Mitch, is to take and try to earn the support of everyone who didn't vote for me. And so I'm going to be working through the next several months to make sure that we do that.
The race for the U.S. Senate seems to be a foregone conclusion there. Senator Steve Daines will be facing Governor Steve Bullock in the primary race. Daines faced Dan Larson and John Driscoll. He won with 88% of the vote, confidently advancing to take on Bullock in November. And the governor had once set his sights on the White House, but he joined the U.S. Senate race on the final day of filing. His entry into the race made him the odds-on favorite to secure that nomination. And he went on to do that with 95% of the vote after challenging Loma rancher and Navy veteran John Muse, as well as Mike Knowles. Meanwhile, the race between Daines and Bullock does promise to be a key fight in the control for the U.S. Senate. We do know both candidates will spend a lot of money in that race, but the junior senator said on Tuesday there were some big differences between him and the governor.
Well, there's going to be some significant contrasts between what I stand for and what the governor stood for. I always put Montana first, and I declared that I was going to run for re-election early to continue serving Montana. It didn't take Chuck Schumer, like it did for the governor, to come into Montana and talk him into the race. Remember, the governor said repeatedly, I'm not running, I'm not running. And then Chuck Schumer got on a private jet, flew into Montana, and met face-to-face with the governor and talked him into the race. There's just a few days left before the filing deadline in early March.
Now, there's some other key statewide races that we've been keeping an eye on. The Attorney General's office, currently held by Tim Fox, who is running for governor. 2 Democrats were in the running for that. Rafe Graybill of Helena, with 57% of the vote this morning, was taking on Missoula Representative Kim Dudick, who came in at 42%. On the Republican side, John Binion, the current Chief Deputy Attorney General for Montana, and Austin Knudsen, Roosevelt County Attorney and former rep from House District 34. Austin Knudsen goes on with 60% of the vote. Meanwhile, there are 5 GOP contenders in the race for the Secretary of State. The winner to face Democrat Bryce Bennett in November, and Christy Jacobson comes out on top there with 29% of the vote. The state auditor seat now open because Matt Rosendale running for the U.S. House. The Democratic side, Mike Windsor of Helena, a lawyer who worked for several years in the auditor's office, taking on his opponent in the primary, Western Montana State Representative and lawyer Shane Morgeau. Morgeau goes on with 61%. On the Republican side, Bozeman businessman Troy Downing squaring off against Miles City's Nellie Nickel and Missoula insurance broker Scott Tuxbury. And Troy Downing going on ahead with 50% of the vote. And there's also a race for a seat on the Montana Supreme Court, a nonpartisan race there between incumbent Justice Lori McKinnon and Helena attorney Mike Black. If we can move on to those Supreme Court results, if we have those this morning. Okay, we don't have that right now. We'll try to get that for you coming up later in the show. And there's also an opening on the Public Service Commission, District 3, Southwest Montana. That includes parts of Broadwater, Jefferson, and Marr counties. Republican candidates James Brown and Alan George. The winner faces Democrat Tom Woods in November. James Brown clinching that one with 64% of the vote. And